Good afternoon, and welcome into another edition of Into the Weeds podcast that we do every other week. And just thankful that you have took time to join us here today. Very excited about our podcast topic here tonight, guys, and appreciate y'all joining us too each and every time that we gather together and just taking time to be with us. So we'll just dive right in. So we talked about the subject of the last days church. How are we? And then how effective have we been? So, two different questions. One, how do you see the health of the church today? Health of the church meaning not a specific denomination, maybe not here at Gethsemane, maybe not at New Spring, maybe not at the church down the road, but just the overall health of the church as you see it in your heart. And then we'll dive into the effectiveness of the church and how that ties to maybe how God instituted it and how Jesus instituted it when he left here just over 2,000 years ago. So with that, let's dive into, I think, the directive that God had given to the church when Jesus left this world and went back to be with his heavenly Father can be found in the Gospels, but specifically in Matthew chapter 28. I was looking there, and the Bible gives us what we know as the Great Commission. The Great Commission is to go ye into all the world and to teach all nations, essentially to disciple them, right? Baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And then getting them to do to observe all the things. The next verse says in verse 19, those things that Jesus had taught those disciples, and so that was the Great Commission. And so I think that's where all of us were from that moment to where we are today. The church went about to be about the Father's business. So it got me thinking about this particular topic and how do we see the church as far as the health of the church. I look back at the Church of Acts, which is the church that we all recognize as where it all started. From Jesus' ascension, what we know as the church age was set in motion. I think we all know that. So from that point to where we are today, how do we measure the health of the church then till now? And I think when you look back at the health of the church then, you could look at it multiple different ways. You could say, well, it was just in its infancy. So the health of the church, maybe it hadn't been around long enough to really say, because they struggled at times. We do know that. We saw that there. But you also saw a tremendous passion in the church then. So I guess it's depending on which side of the fence you're looking at as far as how healthy was the church then. I personally think the church was extremely healthy then. When you think about just the spiritual side of things and their passion, their desire to tell people about Christ, because again, he just had left them. They were eyewitnesses in most cases, those disciples, those apostles, to Jesus himself. So there was a passion there, and I think the health of the church, there was an excitement for the church during that time. And then if you fast forward to now and everything in between, how did we see it progress, or how did we see it fall off? I guess that would be the question today. Did we see a continued progression from that time period, or have we seen it continue to fall off since that time period? So where do we see the health of the church as far as, I guess in a spiritual sense? How do you guys see it? Maybe as far as, I don't know, maybe as far as growth, maybe as far as the spirit that we feel in the services, the word being taught, whatever you would measure the health. If you were to put a pulse on the church today based on what you see and what you feel and what you hear, would you say the church is healthy, or would you say it's a little sick, or would you say it's in ICU? Or is it at the morgue? I guess that would be the question. So if you want to dive in.
Well, I mean, we talked about this Saturday, right?
We did, actually.
We talked about this a little bit Saturday morning, and so if I think about, there's lots of things come to mind, but I think the overall church, right? We talked about denominations and the Protestant Reformation, all that kind of stuff on Saturday. I feel like the church is just more fragmented. The central point is here, what you just read, in the Great Commission. It's there, but it seems like I don't know. It's a lot of different opinions on how to get there. And it seems like sometimes those differences in opinions divide the church, right? And if there was a way that we could come together on the central thing here, is just to make disciples of Christ, baptize them, and show them, right, how to do it. So I don't know, those differences sometimes make me think that it's just not as strong as it was in the beginning, but it didn't take long for it to start breaking down, though. You think about it, it was, the apostolic church was around for a long, long time before it started getting more organized, like we talked about a little bit on Saturday. But you remember the first episode when you'll be able to speak to this more intelligently than me, but when there was that breakdown, the widows that weren't getting the food that they were supposed to get, and
called the 70 men. Yep.
And the apostle said, "Look, it's our job to teach and preach. We need some help here to take care of these widows and these complaints that are coming up." So I think that maybe that's the first example of a complaint within the church that I can recall.
Right.
So it really started, really early on.
Yeah.
But I think overall we're probably weaker than we should be.
Yeah.
Well, it's come a long way, right? I mean, it's definitely left all of Judea and Samaria. I mean, it's come a long way from there. I mean, it's done really well.
Yes.
But to your point, we've gotten really far away from what the original church in Acts was all about, right? The first church, the early church in Acts was just about bearing witness to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and then making disciples in His name, right? That's what it was.
That's right.
That's all they did. And people were saved by the thousands, and we've come to a point where I think we are fragmented. We've put our own. I think we've done a lot of adding what man likes of what that was, and putting in our own kind of things, and that's how we get a lot of fragmented as well. So I think I think the only reason that maybe we've come as far as we have is because the Spirit was on the church and still is, but. Man, if that were to ever, fall back a little bit, I think we'd be at the morgue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of churches do a lot of great things. I'll say great things about the church that we're sitting in. There's a very good. I mean, the gospel's preached every Sunday. There's always a chance to meet Jesus Christ every Sunday, and there's some places that doesn't have that. Like altar calls are weird in some churches. So then you got to look back and say, are some of these churches even? Are they even churches? Mm-hmm. They're masquerading as one. Mm-hmm. So we may be in a. I think we're definitely weaker than we were. I think we've traveled a long way, but what's traveled?
It's a great point. So Tim mentioned fragmentation. You're right. I forgot all about us talking about that Saturday, but it, and being weaker. I think it's our churches definitely are more fragmented, and you're right to the point that. A lot of times our churches become social gatherings, really, rather than discipleship training seminars or sessions, right, where we bring people in and churches are for us to come, hear the word from God, be, equipped to go out in the highways and hedges and compel them to come, right? That's what we are to do. And the Great Commission was to go ye into all the world and teach all nations. And I think somewhere it went to where we think that it was about just bringing them to church, getting them saved, and we're going to open the doors and they're going to come. And I think in the 1980s, for sure, there was a study that a fellow, his last name was Wren. He did a study in the 80s, from the 80s to like 1994, you saw a change there. Like in the early to 40s, 50s, 60s, even in the 70s, you had churches that were really go out minded and to teach and to talk and to pull people in. And somewhere in the 80s, the early 80s, from 80 to like 94, we started being more inward and started, because it was an accepted thing to be a Christian. In the 80s, from 80 to 94, it was one of those things that you were expected. He did a study on this that Wren did. And it was accepted. In fact, if you weren't a Christian, they said during those times it was even hard to sometimes even get a loan from a bank because you weren't looked at as somebody that was stable or somebody that was in good standing in your community. And so I thought that was really interesting now that we're talking about it. And anyway, somewhere like from 94 to maybe in the early 2000s, 2004, some of that range he had mentioned, there was like a neutralization of the church where it was okay if you went to church, but if you didn't, it was okay. So it wasn't anything that, it wasn't like you were looked bad on for going to church, but you also wasn't just looked at as a good citizen if you did. So it was okay in the middle. And I think that's where that change started happening, where we felt like, all right, we're just going to open the doors and let them come. And now we're to the point where it was like in 2014, there was a shift again, according to Wren, and he has some statistics. You guys have to look at it. But from there to where we are today, it became really unpopular to be a Christian. And, and so it really forced people, especially with COVID, COVID forced people to kind of segregate a little bit. And then when they did come to church, everybody gathered back in church, but we're not as eager to go out and tell people, because that stigma, I think, still there about, we were kind of pulled back to say, let's don't congregate, And I think that's still kind of in our minds just a little bit. That, along with the fact that it's not as accepted to be a Christian anymore. It's almost looked at as hate sometimes to be a Christian, because you're looked at as bigots, or you looked at it as non-compassionate or better than some, that bigot, same thing. But I think sometimes that may have caused some of that inner, pulling back. And so you're right. We're not out there doing some of the things we used to do. And I shouldn't say there's a lot of churches that do get out and do things. But as far as the Great Commission going out, not necessarily building a ramp, not necessarily about putting a roof on, cutting somebody's grass, all that's wonderful things. But the go out and testify, as you said, to people seems to be not where it was. So if you looked at it in that aspect, I would think that, like you said, it's obviously grown from Judea to where we are today, but has it grown spiritually? And then the growth that we have seen, are we sustaining it? And I got some statistics I'll give you in a minute about the early church and the sustainability of the early church, but I think maybe it's strong in some areas and weak in other areas.
Just try to look back on the the church when it started, and the circumstances at the time. And you look at kind of the church today and our circumstances today, and I just wonder, because you might be going to hit some of this in a minute, but how rapidly the church grew, and the conversions came pretty quick. When
Yes, they did.
They would speak and lay on hands and perform signs and stuff like that. And thousands of people were being converted pretty quickly then. And I think there's more hesitation now for some reason. Maybe it's skepticism, about it. That might come because of through the ages, how Christians have not always acted Christian-like. Maybe judgmental is the word, and you looked at as perhaps being judgmental and more righteous or holier than thou and those sorts of things. And but so people may be a little more hesitant or skeptical today, where back then I think they were, I don't want to say hungrier, but it's almost like they were looking for something more, and the way that the word was being spread and the way it was being shared must have been very, very compelling.
Yes.
Very compelling. And those people, again, I'm not saying they were destitute. I'm sure there's many early converts who lived as well as anybody could have lived at that time. We know that there were those types of people.
Right.
So it's not like they were destitute and they were just looking for something, but the church came together. They sold their possessions. They ate together, prayed together, stayed together, worshiped together. Did it at their homes. And you think too, when the church started, when they first started going, right, they were going to the synagogues, right, to a large degree, because they were trying to convert the Jews, right? So they were going to the synagogue. So there was a Jewish place of worship where they were spreading the early word, but there wasn't really a Christian church. There wasn't really a structure. It was the community.
Right.
It's kind of like wherever you went, that's where Christ was, sort of thing. So that's a little bit different. But people were still looking for salvation. They were looking for an answer. And there's people here today that do that. And I don't know if we're more skeptical now than they might have been, but could have something to do.
Well, the vehicle was like the Roman Empire, right? They were, basically holding them hostage in their own land. But it's just the vehicle. There's different things now. What's holding people hostage now is things like you spoke about on Sunday, like comfort or mass media, noise, all these things that they look to other than a relationship with Jesus. The relationship is still there, right? It's just a lot more to choose from than Jesus now.
Yeah.
Right? It was, hey, I'm under occupation rule by the Romans. Yeah, this is a great thing. We saw this guy. We saw what happened. These guys are testifying of what happened, and now I've got this freedom in him. And now, it's harder to choose that because there's a lot more on offer. Is it good? No, absolutely not. But there's a lot more for people to wrap their heads around than Jesus.
Well, you got to think about this stuff. So you had in the Old Testament, you had all those thousands of years of Judaism, right? And a history of things going right and things going wrong, and so here we are now in Christianity where Judaism was when Christ came, give or take.
Yep.
So now we have a history, in Christianity of all the rights and all the wrongs. And so people see that. And in the early days, they didn't have that.
No.
Right? It was fresh, it was brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And there really were no rights or wrong when it came to Christianity, or no wrongs, I guess, when it come to Christianity. You believed and you saw the you saw the signs and you believed,
Yeah.
right? And you heard the word, and so you believed, and you didn't have this history to kind of fall back on and shine a negative light or cast shade, on the
Yeah.
Christian church. So we have that to deal with now.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, 100%. And I think, I was just sitting there thinking about something you said too, the skepticism, right, that could be out there and why that might be. And I think too, sometimes, the early church, like you said, there was a passion right behind those men and women that preached the gospel at that time, really just testifying. They didn't have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John like we got. They were basically just testifying of the things that they saw, like you said, and the things that they witnessed with Christ. And because of that, it was very compelling, right? Because it wasn't something that, oh, hey, listen, I read in Mark chapter 3, verse 24, man, where Jesus healed this guy, and you believe that? That's great, ain't it? And
They
first
had the
question,
guy.
Yeah, somebody's going to say, well, did you see it? Well, no, obviously I didn't. That's 2,000 years ago, man. But you get a guy that was standing there, and might have been saying, hey, Bartimaeus, hush, he ain't got time for you. And then Jesus comes by and starts talking to him and heals him right in front of you, and he says, look, I saw that. That dude was blind. And these people also knew Bartimaeus, to Tim's point. So they're talking to these people about things that had happened, which takes me to the next thing. The skepticism now, I think, may be greater than it was then, or like you said, maybe it's not because we got other things we deal with. But if we're just looking at just from that time period, just go to there and we had no history, right? I think there might have been less skepticism because they saw it, they experienced it, right? And the passion and the hunger and the Christ that was in these guys, they too were laying hands on people and they were being healed, right? There was things happening, and the Bible makes reference, these signs shall follow believers. We touched on that Saturday, I think. Okay. And so you think about that, they were seeing these things happening, which is awful compelling. It's hard to not say there's a Jesus when you just saw somebody healed in the name of Jesus, right? And you knew that they were born and never been able to move before in their life, and all of a sudden they're now dancing in front of you, so that would draw people. And so I think I said all that to say this. Do you think maybe that people are skeptical, and because people are skeptical, they're not coming to church, and maybe people are coming and saying they're something and they're not, which causes skepticism because we're not reaching them. Maybe the signs aren't there. Maybe we're not where we need to be sometimes. I don't know. There's something, maybe it's something missing, because those guys, when they went about, man, there was a passion behind what they were saying to people. Man, they believed what they said. You could see it. Like I think about Tim sometimes, like last time we had this podcast, you were moved to tears, and it's because there was a passion and a hunger and a Jesus in you that moved you at that moment, that it wasn't just your emotions, it was the Jesus in you that moved your emotions. And that's what moves people, because they see a real thing. Right. And so I think today in our churches, we got people that really aren't maybe who they say they are. Maybe they really love Jesus and they want to be there, but they just haven't had that encounter. And so they make mistakes and do things they shouldn't do, right, which then causes skepticism. And maybe that's because we have a lack of discipleship. To your point, maybe we're not discipling it in a way that it's passionate enough that they see it and receive it. And maybe they aren't seeing some of those signs and wonders because we're not where we need to be too. Those guys were, these guys, you think about it. Who was it? Peter and John that were walking at the temple, just walking around, and this got the shadow.
Yeah, right.
That was cast off of Peter. Man, this dude got healed. It was just a shadow. So you think about how close he was to Jesus.
Yeah, it makes me think though. So a lot of time in between now and then, and so kind of as you get further away from things, right, it just doesn't seem quite as maybe real or as tangible.
Right.
So the more time has gone on, maybe that has happened a little bit too. But the Bible tells us, right, that a couple things come to mind. And I don't know, Keith might have touched on part of this Sunday or whatever. But one thing comes to mind to me is faith. He says, you have faith because you have seen. Greater is the faith of those who have not seen, right, believe but have not seen. That's us.
Yep.
Right, for the most part.
Jesus face to face.
And so so that comes to mind. And the other thing was I think it was the signs in the later days. like kind of where we
Greater,
are, and you'll see
yeah.
even greater signs. You'll see you'll see even greater things then than what you have seen, or
Yeah.
what you're seeing now.
Yeah.
And so we're in those times, and so I have faith, right, that
We'll see it.
that we will see it, and we'll begin to
Yeah.
see it. So it's just what we're talking about, like if there's skepticism because people aren't seeing the things that
Yeah.
that the apostles saw and did, that in the later times we should see those. We should see more and more of them, right?
I agree, and I think that's that's where ultimately we're going to try to wind up is, yeah, we may have had a little lull in there, right? Because maybe it's lack of discipleship, and we're not discipling the way we should, and so we're not seeing some of those signs that we're talking about. Because signs and wonders are given to the church, really not for the church. It's really for people that don't know Christ to see and be drawn to it, right? And so maybe we're in that lull, and I guess the health of the church maybe not quite as healthy as it was, healthy in preaching and teaching the word like we should.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but I know Nate, being a small group director, and Tim being highly involved in small groups over the years, I think we all can say that some churches have better attendance in small groups than others. But I think as a whole, if you looked at your overall attendance of a church, if it's 1,000 people and you got 100 coming, you say that's great, but that's only 10%.
Yeah.
And so if you got a church of 300 and you've got 10% coming, it's only 30, or 20% at 60, or 20% at 200, or whatever it may be. You could say, well, that's good, but is it? You got 1,000 people,
Yeah.
and you don't, they're not going. So I think, our discipleship, that's where we've got to get better at. And I think as we do, we'll see that last days outpouring that the Bible teaches us in Acts chapter 17, I believe it is, or Acts chapter 7, where it tells us that we're going to see those greater things.
Yeah.
So signs and wonders, they still exist.
Yes.
Right? There's complete healing. People who are riddled with cancer and
All over the
complete
world.
healing. Right? There's people who are so addicted to drugs and alcohol that they couldn't leave the house,
Yes.
but they're free.
Yeah.
Free in an instant.
Yeah.
Right? And we see that. And I'm kind of going, the way I'm going here is maybe we are not as good as we used to be at testimony.
Yep.
About witnessing the things and bearing witness to the things that we have seen, and those kind of healings. And what you can't argue with is somebody who stands up here and gives a personal testimony, who was riddled with cancer, or who, was addicted to some sort
Amen.
of
That's
substance
right,
or
yeah.
something. They stand up and they say, "Look at who I was,
Yeah.
and look at who I am now." And then the same way that one person can sell a testimony and make it hard for an unbeliever to maybe be skeptical, right? Because it's easy to sell a testimony. You walk around and you wear a Jesus shirt and act like you shouldn't, right? It's like the whole story where you
Yeah.
get pulled over and they're upset and they say, "Why'd you pull me over?" It's because you were yelling and cussing out the window, and you had a Jesus sticker on the back of your car, so I thought you had stolen it, right?
Yeah.
That's what the cop. That's the guy. So, but the same way you can also, tell somebody else and maybe relieve some of that skepticism by bearing, having better testimony. So I think that's a big deal, and I don't know that we're quite as good at that as we used to be as a church either.
It's a great point.
Doesn't it, when you talk about miracles and healing now, doesn't it seem like the story has more credibility when the doctor says, "I can't explain it"?
Yes.
So like a preacher, we can go and pray and feel completely confident that prayer is what healed this person, but people are still going to be like, there's people that are
Yeah.
skeptical. But a
Yeah.
doctor comes along and says, "Look, we used all the greatest medical advancements in the world, and what happened there, we cannot explain
Yeah.
it."
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I think people, they give more credibility to the miracle because
Yeah.
because it couldn't be explained
Yeah.
by modern
Yeah, 'cause
medicine.
that's
or
just the way we
science,
are,
you
right?
know?
We're built that way, and I think it's probably the same way back in Jesus' time there when he was here. But I think, so if I'm hearing you correctly, I think maybe we need to, testify more of that, because like you said, I know just some people I know that have been healed recently, or that have overcome a lot of great things, that God has done in their lives. But we don't talk about it as much. We don't testify about it as much. But that's what he told them to do, is go out and testify of the things that you have seen me do, things that I have done, that you've experienced, that other people have experienced. Testify of those things. Not necessarily go out there and preach Matthew chapter 25 to them, but give them your life. Give them what God's done for you, right? Although we do need to preach Matthew
Yes.
25
No one
to
can
them.
argue the change in you,
Right.
right? The change that Jesus made in you.
Yeah.
Same way you should just the same way you should celebrate every single baptism. Every time somebody meets Jesus, man, it should be a party in here, right?
Yeah.
It should, clap, and instead of just standing up and walking away from a miracle. It's a
Right.
miracle, right?
Right.
Someone is
Somebody got saved.
showing and giving an outward a sign of faith about what Jesus means in their life, and
Yeah.
turn your back to them and walk out.
Yeah.
'Cause-
So I definitely, I think, yeah. And so, just a couple of things we've touched on here, the health of the church, it's the fragmentation of the church, right? Because of the lack of discipleship, the fragmentation of the church, or the lack of faith in the church because of our, lack of testimony, right? And people talking. He's still doing these things. Maybe the other side of Tim's point, maybe the doctor does give a lot more credibility to it, but in other instances, when it doesn't happen, I knew he wasn't going to heal you, and all these things, and so all that it plays against it. But I think if the Bible, it makes mention that we're made overcomers by our testimony, right? It doesn't say it just like that, but that's what we do, and so I think our discipleship, maybe our lack of talking about it, and then maybe our lack of going out there, and being a church outside the walls.
And so, so talking about how we're doing, the first thing that comes to mind for me is like our community, the United States. We live in a prosperous nation, and the church is growing fastest where in third world countries,
It
right?
sure is.
And times are probably more like what they were maybe at the early church and that sort of thing. And so, so here I think maybe we're a little spoiled, perhaps. When I first think about, around here, and not around here like in our country, sort of thing. But it makes me think too that they were all in, right? When they gave their lives to Christ and they believed the word, it seems they were all in.
Yeah.
And now I think people just maybe aren't always all in. They might think they are. Some people might think they are, and they just don't know because they really haven't had that true encounter, But then I think there's some folks, man, who like the idea of it, but I think they intentionally can't or won't be all in. I think about Ananias and Sapphira, right?
Yeah, sure.
That was the early church.
Yeah.
So again, talk about problems in the early church. And even though they wanted to support the church, they couldn't help themselves but keep a little bit back. And then they lied about it.
Right.
And that's an extreme example because God struck both of them dead,
He did.
right? As a result of holding
Yeah.
back and not giving, of a open and true and sincere heart as they should have, and then lying about it was even worse. It makes me think if they hadn't lied,
Yeah.
Right.
maybe they'd have just been smacked on the wrist or
Very
something, right? And they would
repented.
learn from it or something like that. But again, they weren't. Those two are examples. They weren't all in. At the time,
Yeah.
and again, that's a bit extreme, but I think there's a lot of people probably in the church today just because of how we live and the life we don't feel as dependent, on God, on we may feel more self-sufficient, and when it comes down to times of when you're really destitute and there's nothing that your money or position in society can do to help you through a situation, that's when God comes through when people truly give it up. So I think we just live in a very prosperous nation where maybe folks don't truly recognize the need and the dependency, on God.
Yeah.
That might, so again, from a church perspective, there's those of us who can try. And the other thing is just example.
Yeah.
Again, those people were given. Ananias and Sapphira are the opposite. Everybody else, we're given everything. And I think lots of times today we just want to give, as long as it's not an inconvenience for me. If it's your time, if it's your talents, if it's your money, it's like, well, I'll do this much because I don't want to inconvenience myself, to advance the kingdom of God. I'll be there on Sunday. I'll do this. So I think sometimes that might be part of it too. That I don't know. Folks are just more into their lives and they want to follow Christ, but they don't want to be inconvenienced by it. That makes
Busy.
sense.
Oh yeah.
And
makes
listen, I mean, it's
perfect
kind of, I've had times in my life too
Well, we all
where,
have.
and
Yeah.
even today
Sure,
where
sure.
I get lots of opportunities to do things where I could be a good example of Christ. And, and I pass them by, not all the time, but lots of times.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. I think that's a great example of maybe the health of the church and why we're maybe not as strong as we need to be. You can't be strong if you're not all in, right?
Yeah.
And it's like a tug of war rope. We did that at camp this year, and we had two teams. And I'll be quite honest with you, the one team, when I looked at them, I said, "This is not going to be a contest."
Yeah.
All the athletic people were on one side, and on the other side, it was folks that were maybe not athletic, but highly intelligent, in other areas, and were gifted in other areas, just not in basketball, football, and baseball, and that are working out and strong and all these things, right? So I thought, this is going to get ugly quick. It didn't. In fact, the team that was not athletic won. And I'm sitting there thinking, as I had the middle of the rope, And I said, all right, and I could feel them both pulling, I'm trying to hold it. I said, hang on a minute now, when they turned it loose, it stood there for a minute, and it actually went toward the more athletic team. But it wasn't long till you seen it do this right here, and I thought, what's happening? But the difference was, this team was a team.
Mm-hmm.
They had talked about it. They were all in. And they were all pulling at the same time and leaning, pulling, talking to each other. This team were all trying to be maybe the hero, right? They were all working. They weren't working with each other. They were all just trying to pull it themselves. I got it. I'll help you. I got this thing. You may not, maybe Tim's in front of me and Tim's saying, Mark, I got you. I got you. Just back up and give me a step. I got you. I know you're, and it just seemed like they weren't working. You could hear them. They were just arguing with each other and weren't talking to each other. This other side was different. So to your point, maybe our churches, no, not maybe, I think our churches are certainly a little weaker today, maybe because, we're not all in. We're not working with each other, and that's why the Bible says that, if we're in one mind and one accord, man, that's when you see things start happening. And it's a great point. The early church, even though they had their issues, the majority were all in. When you looked at it, even the 12, let's go back to the 12. They were all in at one time, but then Judah started backing up a little bit, right? So you had 11 pulling in one direction and only one that wasn't. So they all weren't pulling, but you had the majority that were. I think maybe we've seen a shift in our churches today, and all we can speak of is our Western church, right, and really South Carolina and in our country, but in our state. But it seems like there may be a little shift where we're not all pulling together, and it's, to your point, the different denominations and the splits, and because we're not all pulling together, right? We've started, and so now at times it seems like the ropes maybe we're losing some ground with the rope. Now, of course, we know we're not going to be defeated. The Bible says the church won't be defeated. But the point is, in the tug of war, if you're looking at it, maybe we've lost some ground because we're not working together. We're not all in.
Yeah, I think too. So I know we're talking about the church and how we're doing, but
health,
how we're doing as a church, has a lot to do with society, right? And kind of where we are and how we need to, I don't know, pivot or go at it a little bit different. But I was just thinking about, the Jews and the early Christians, they were being assessed taxes by Rome, right? So they had to pay their taxes to Rome.
Right.
But I don't know what benefit the Jews got out of the taxes they paid to Rome.
You're right.
But if you look at the United States, a lot of people are dependent on our government for care. And if they're dependent on our government for care, then that's another thing that perhaps could lead them not to be so dependent on the church.
Correct.
If the church, I'm telling you, man, it's like this the whole tithing thing, and not to get on money, but if everybody who are professed Christians would just tithe, forget about the offering, just tithe.
That's a great point.
We could take care of our communities.
Sure.
But money it's a tough thing, and you end up with a whole lot of money, and then the arguments about how you spend it and everything. But I think about it. I say this, I believe it, but you ain't never done the numbers. But you look at the homeless situation and, just children without parents. And, Connie Maxwell's a wonderful organization, for children here in town. And, but, I think if the churches, if the congregations would truly tithe, that the funds would be there, and we could take care of them in a way where they wouldn't. Maybe they turn to the church before they turn to the government.
That's a great point.
Yes, it is.
And the crazy thing about it is that what you were talking about with the children, I'm almost positive, and I've heard this before, and I'm pretty sure that if one family in each church congregation would take a child out of the foster care system, then we wouldn't have an issue with the foster care system. But your point about tithing, the church used to take care of the communities.
Exactly.
They were the first schools. They were the first
welfare,
orphanages.
Right.
They were the first hospitals.
Yeah.
They were the first all of that. And then and I don't know if there's a correlation between that and the fact that people stopped maybe doing what they needed to do tithe-wise or giving to the church, but we gave that up and we gave it to the government. And I say we as in them back then, but
and of course we should depend on the church, our brothers and sisters, and if we're in times of distress or whatever, we should feel comfortable depending on our church family for support when we need it. But we shouldn't live our lives expecting it.
Right.
You know, a lot of people, I think, we've had this conversation. And it was more with spiritual contribution, not so much your services or your
Right.
money, but it was more about your presence. And you know, a lot of people come to church on Sundays, and you know, I've been there and still sometimes there, or to study groups where you're looking to receive something.
Right.
Right. You're like,
Right.
I'm gonna go because
Yeah.
I don't want to miss what I'm going to get. You know, and it dawned on me. We may have talked about it in this podcast that you know, don't think just about what you're going to miss on receiving, but just think about what everybody else is going to miss from your contribution.
That's exactly
You
right.
know,
Yeah,
from you being there. So that's the way it goes. It's a give and a get sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's a hard thing for people to give up. But the church would be stronger,
Yes.
right? If we could do that. And I don't know, I'll get rambling here in a minute, but people just seem there's a very select few that are willing to sacrifice themselves in a way for the benefit of others. You know, really like say,
Yes.
you know, the widow's mite, you know, and so I don't know. But, again, it's if tithing is the example, but if people could just commit themselves more to the church,
Yes.
we could influence church. You know, something else too. So again, I think about government dependence and how it's different now maybe than it was then. But you know, I just think people are a little afraid sometimes to help because they're worried about their safety. I think about mental illness in our country, schizophrenia and other things. And, you know, sometimes you're afraid to approach somebody, you know, but sometimes you think, you know, man, Lord, you know, if I had enough faith, I could go and heal him and kick all those demons out of his head, you know, just like, you know, the guy in the tombs,
Sure.
you know,
Genesaret, yeah.
and Genesaret. So you think about it, but sometimes I think we're a little afraid, you know, and then we tell ourselves, well, you know, I know that's the Christian thing to do, but you know, I can't, you know, jeopardize
Yeah.
my safety or my
Yeah.
family's safety,
Yeah.
which I think sometimes you have to use some discretion, you know,
Sure.
through prayer, and whatnot. But I think sometimes people are just standoffish. The world is really ugly. I don't know if it's any uglier now than it was back then. I mean, God, the things they were doing back then.
Sure.
But you know, it happens and the world's really ugly. I think sometimes people are a little afraid. You know?
I think so. So that's a lot to unpack. But you're right. I think the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned tithing, and we're talking about the health of the church, I think the church for sure is weaker than it was. Let's go back to Acts, right, when they were all bringing it into the storehouse, and they were given, and it says that they all were taken care of. Nobody went without, right? And to Nate's point, you know, even on up into the, into the 20th century, on into the early part of the 20th century, the church still, you know, on up into the 40s and 50s, that's where you went. You know, there wasn't a lot of government help and assistance, and the churches is what took care. You took care of your people, and then you took care of your communities. You know, and that's what it was. But I think that certainly, I think a lack of the stay on tithe, since we're talking about it, because it does have something to do with the health of the church. If people aren't paying their tithes into the church, it weakens them because it's sinful, right? So it does weaken those people, which then weakens the church.
Yeah.
It's twofold, but it also weakens the arm and the strength of the church because they don't have the financing to help the other people, right? So therefore, we begin to weaken the church again. So I certainly think it's twofold. It weakens the person, it weakens the church, and then it makes the church where they're going, sure, we'd love to go help that Tim Hodges guy. I know he needs a bag of groceries, but man, we just ain't got it. You know, we just ain't got it. We ain't got the money anymore. People ain't paying attention. And so you see that happening in churches, right? And I've seen it to the point where people couldn't even send kids to church camps. You know, and they're saying, hey, look, we're going to have a church camp. That's the good news. Bad news is y'all got to pay for it. Your family's got to pay for it, right? And the church couldn't afford to pay for the church camp anymore. And for years, that's what we're supposed to be doing. But there's no money to come in to do it, right? So now you got young people who are very vulnerable and at a time when they really need to hear the word, when you can reach them, and they can't go because we don't have the money. So now they don't get to hear in that, they may hear the gospel, but not in that intense setting that's designed just for them.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's just one instance of why I'm not paying tithes. And so it goes back to what a friend of mine said one time. He said it to my son. I think, Tim, I might have told you this. I might have told you too, Nate, but you know, Nate's always grown up in our house, and he's never known a time that I wasn't a preacher. And so he knows about tithing, and he's been told about tithing. He understands tithing, but he just had a hard time with tithing. Like you said, once he started making money, he realized, hey, you know, look at all this money I'm making. I can't give that money to the Lord. And he went to a friend of mine's house, Joey and Jeannie Powell, and he was over there. She had retired from work, and she was over the, liver. When you have liver problems, you have to go have
Dialysis.
Dialysis center. Thank you, in Lawrence. And so she retired, and the sheriff knew about it. He said, listen, that's a great thing she did for our community, give her a police escort home. Just kind of making her
Oh,
day
that's
really
cool.
nice, yeah. So Nate got to do it because he knew her. So when he got home with him, he said, Joey and Jenny said, come on in with us. He'd known him since he was in diapers. And they got in, and somehow they got on tithing. And they were talking about it, and Joey said to Nate, Nate, let me put it to you this way. Would you rather live on 90% blessed or 100% cursed?
Mm-hmm.
That's how he said it. And Nate, from that moment, the light, but he come home and he's so excited, Dad, you ain't gonna believe it. He said, let me tell you what Joey told me. I said, son, I've been telling you all your life. I just didn't say it like that, but
Yeah.
but the way it was said to him grabbed him, and he understood, what you're saying. Tithing is not, I think sometimes people think, oh man, I'm just giving my money away, or I'm praying that old preacher, and all those things. The money goes in, and it's to help it further the kingdom. And if we don't do it, it does certainly weaken it. And I think from that moment till now, I think we can honestly say that I think it's probably gotten weaker over time. You get churches that you may have a room full of people, but your finances are struggling, and it's no way it should be. And the old 20-80 rule, I don't know in our church. I don't care to know who pays tithes in our church. I do not know, and I would say most ministers don't, and I would tell you if you're watching, don't. You don't need to be involved in that, right, because it affects how you preach. But you know the finances, and you know what's coming in, and you can look at how many members you got, and you can divide that out, and you know they're not all paying it, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that you look at. It's a mystery, why people don't. It's not a mystery, but it's just like, hey,
It's hard.
if it's what you're supposed to be doing, do it, and it helps everybody, and you help advance the kingdom of God. So I think it certainly. I'm glad you brought it up. It definitely weakens the church.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the same thing. You talk about the 80-20 deal there. It's the same thing with who serves the church. It's the same people that are showing up, that are setting up, that are doing this, that are doing that, and
Yep.
you got folks, but flip it around. If it was 80% doing, 20. I mean,
Man.
just thinking about the change.
How effective would it be?
Just think about the change. So I don't know. It's hard, but I think that folks who, for me, it didn't happen overnight.
Me neither.
It's been gradual, and there's times when I feel a little stressed out, because of my commitments. There's been times when I was completely burnt out. Because of my commitments to the
Yep.
church, and
Yep.
caused me to back away a pretty severe way for a few years and whatnot. And so it's not an easy thing, but it is a balance, and it's not an act, but it's a life balance.
But let me ask you a question. So you get burnt out and you get overwhelmed sometimes because you're trying to do more than one thing, right? And maybe you think you're trying to do more than one thing because somebody else isn't doing that thing, right? It goes back to that 20-80. So now you start picking up the slack for somebody. And you're right. I've seen burnout in churches so many times. We got people in our church. I know we've all seen it in our churches. Man, they're wearing 6 hats.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You don't need to have but one, but you're looking around and you've got hundreds and hundreds of people, but yet you got, like you said, those 10 or 20. And so that takes us to another reason why maybe the church is weaker, right? You got less commitment, like
Yeah.
you say, and not just in tithing, but in service, as Tim said. And if you had 80%, and I go back to that early church, there was more than 20%, it appears, that were all in. And so,
Man, if you had 50.
yeah, I mean, what would the United States look like if you had that?
Yeah.
Not just
it would
our
be
church.
changed.
Yeah, so it's kind of like,
It's just so hard to explain to people the same joy that they have, that they feel, that they're experiencing, and then when the spirits abound, and they don't want to leave the church.
Sure.
And they're just mingling around that same joy that they're feeling there. If some of that was to be put towards service or plugging in or doing something, how much more joy and passion you would have. It's not work and it's not a task. It's almost that service is almost like it's a gift, and you have no idea what you're about to step into. The second you start to do more or pick up just the littlest thing is like picking up a chair and helping move something. All of a sudden, it opens up doors you never knew existed inside the
Yes.
church. Right? Relationships you never knew existed were never there. Right? People that you hadn't talked to, and all of a sudden you're like, man, we live on the same street. It's just the craziest thing. It's amazing what'll happen. So if you find yourself standing around and not wanting to leave the church, it's not because you're waiting to meet somebody new, or because it's because of the joy you're feeling.
Yeah.
But man, if you were just to put that a little extra, just step in one step more, it would change everything.
Yeah, so like we've been talking a lot about the state of the church, kind of how we see it, and what would it be like if things would change. But when you talk about how's the church doing, I can't help but think, just sitting here listening to y'all talk, that all right, so we are the church.
Yep.
So we are the church. So in order to inspire people so that we change those statistics from 80 to 20, how do we do that, right? And again, I think it's
So
just
glad you asked.
I think it's just complete love.
Yeah.
Just love and transparency and honesty, and living for Christ and like Christ, and
Yeah.
and just trying to be such an example that other people want to be that.
Yes.
You get what I'm saying?
There you go.
And,
Yes.
and I know you got something you want to say, but I've said this, I think, maybe in the last podcast, or maybe last 2 or 3 podcasts, but that statistic that I've said, that like 60% of polled Americans now say that they are Christians.
Yeah.
But only, what was that I told you? Only 4% of that 60% say out of their own mouths that they live according to a biblical worldview.
It's tough.
Now, so I mean, think about that seriously. So 60% sounds good, right? We're over half. But when you look at that 60%, and they say themselves, "No, I'm not living according to a biblical worldview." And maybe there's being honest, right, and saying, "Well, none of us are. We're trying to live to we live with a biblical worldview, but imperfectly."
Yes.
Right, because we're sinful, and so we can't do it all perfect. I know some people just don't want to. They don't want to be a hypocrite in their own minds.
Right.
So I'm not going to say that, if I know that I'm not doing that. But I think the idea is, so you're not doing it. Nobody is, because we're not perfect. But do you want to? Do you want to try to live your life according to what the Bible tells us?
Right.
And then strive for that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just give up. It's like, no, I believe in Jesus, but I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't.
Right. Yeah.
I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't have this or whatever. So.
That's good, and that's gonna we'll segue into how effective is the church, right? We talk about the health of the church, so that's a great segue. But before we go any further, we all go to churches that we're very fortunate. We have a lot of volunteers in our churches that are absolutely stepping up and doing it, and we have a lot of folks in our churches that are paying tithes and those kinds of things. Obviously, because we're able to do things right now. Maybe not everybody is paying tithes. Maybe not everybody is volunteering. We could always have more volunteers. We could always have more finances given. Right? Always, you could always have that. But I think we do. We are fortunate to have churches that do that. But as a whole, there needs to be more. And so I just wanted to say that too, because I don't, want to make sure, because like you said, the state of the church as an overall whole, but there are some churches that are really doing great work. And so I don't want to make it sound like that, but to go back to what Tim was saying, how do we become more effective? Because I think the health of the church is a direct reflection of how effective the church is, right? So if we're not as healthy, we're not going to be as effective, right? Because if you're sick, you ain't gonna get out there and cut that grass, right? So you can't be as effective, right? But if you're well and you're healthy, you can go cut that grass, right? You can accomplish things you need to accomplish. So I think, and then we said, well, how do we become more effective? How do we become more healthy, right? And so there were some statistics I was throwing around with Tim when he first came in there that I think are really eye-opening to us, that maybe can take us back to that point. So when you look at the church and how effective are we today versus the church, the first church that was set in motion, right, in the book of Acts, right? When Christ ascended and they were in the upper room. That was the first church that we knew in that moment. Those 120 people in the upper room. Sociologists and historians have said that you went from 120 in the upper room, and in a matter of just a few days, it went to 3,000 members of the church. He added to the church, the Bible says, such as it pleased him. There were 3,000 converted just days after the 120. So that is a 2,400% increase in the church immediately, right? And so my first thought is, what'd they do?
Yeah.
Right? Because that was quick. You had Peter that emerged from the upper room, preached the gospel with boldness, the Bible says, under the inspiration of the Holy Ghost. 3,000 were saved immediately. And so then you fast forward to just a few months later, and you, as an overall whole, you had 5,000 saved in Jerusalem, and that was just men that it is said to have been. So they estimate that to be about 15,000 people, men and women, that probably gave their hearts to the Lord at that time. We know 5,000 men did, but there was other women and children that probably did too, that historians are estimating. So 15,000. So in a matter of 4 months, the church went from 120 to over 15,000 in just a matter of 4 months. I didn't do that math, but that's really strong too. So you saw a tremendous outpouring there. And so my mind immediately went back to what'd they do, right? So it goes back to Tim's question, how can we be examples? But then it went further, and we know that Peter and Paul were commissioned, right, by God to go out to the Gentiles, not just to the Jews, but the Gentiles as well. And so we saw a huge explosion of the church growth in Rome, Ephesus, Philippi, Galatia, Corinth, on and on and on and on. All these that we saw, Macedonia, and all these that we've read about in the New Testament. Tremendous growth, right? And so to the point that the historians, what I was reading and the statistics that I was reading from these folks said that they estimated that the church in the first century, just the first century of the church, the first 100 years after Christ's ascension, so 100 AD, right? So at that point, every 10 years, it grew 40%. Every 10 years. Not 40% one time or stretched out over the 100 years. 40% this decade, it grew another 40% this decade, another 40% the next decade. It continued to grow at the rate of 40% every 10 years through the first century. That is mind-blowing how fast that went. And we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have all the stuff that we have today. They had word of mouth and feet. They carried it, walked and rode, or whatever they did to get it to people. And so you get to thinking, my gosh, what did they do that was so powerful at that time? And so that's where my mind was going. And when you said example, I thought, let's go back and let's see what they did and how can we apply that today. And most people would say, well, it's not possible to do that today because that was then, this is now. You can't take old stuff like people ain't gonna listen to that. Maybe not the way they did it, but what was inspiring them and what they did is not going to change. Whatever they did, whatever the passion was, whatever they did, I think is what we need to look at what we can do. So would we say, based on those statistics for the first 100 years, was the church more successful then than it is today? I don't know how you can measure that. And I don't know if we're more effective now than then. My gut would tell me we're not as effective then. We're really good at getting the word out there, but I don't know that we're really good at getting it out there to the point that it sticks and they have an encounter. I think my opinion, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. My opinion is our concern is more toward our congregates more than it is to those who don't know Christ. We're doing a really good job of making sure our congregations are pleased with what they see and what they hear, rather than preparing them to go and disciple.
Oh, that's good.
Now, that's just Mark's opinion. Now, I could be totally off base with that. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. Maybe what do you think they did differently then? What was the secret sauce then versus now?
Well, I think that they loved effectively. They loved with truth, and they did it locally, right near them. Right? It started to move, but these were people who were right there. I mean, Peter came out of the room and preached right there. So we're talking. I think it love and truth locally. We're real good about sending people overseas and going to mission trips and we love to do that. And I don't want to get off on a tangent on mission trips or whatnot. Yeah. But we're real good about that. But what we're not real good at is meeting immediate needs right outside our doors, where a local church can go out in the community and love in truth. Because it'd be like, well, you can love. A lot of people say, well, you can love. Well, you accept anybody. Well, of course we accept anybody. We love everybody. It's like, but we're not going to let you. We're not going to let you burn because you're sitting here and doing something you shouldn't be doing. We're going to tell you the truth as well. But I think that they did so well because they went out and they loved, just like Jesus loved, and they did it close to their home.
Yeah, very good. Don't deny that. Yeah,
I think a lot of it had to do too because it was brand new, and it was fresh.
Didn't have all the history.
But it was new. It was a new way of thinking, a new, just a new way to access God. Something that they had never experienced before. Like in today, there are people who have not heard of Christ. It's hard to imagine, but there are people who have not. But for most people, where we live, they've heard of him. Yeah. They grew up, and they might have went to church, they might have, but it's nothing really necessarily new about it in the communities and stuff where we live. I got a friend of mine, Jace. He's at my table on Friday mornings, and he was in an orphanage, and he was homeless on the street as a little kid, and he didn't know Jesus, never heard of him, You know, I can't remember. Maybe he told me he was 6 or 8 years old or something when they took him in, and the nuns, you know, started telling him about Jesus, and he's like, really? Really? He loves me, and he'll always be with me, no matter where I go. And he didn't have
amazing.
he didn't have a family. He said, "Yeah, sounds great. I'll follow him." But he was a kid, you know. But you know, it grew in him, you
Yeah.
know, and he's a wonderful man of God now. But you know, that's somebody in my lifetime, right, that I've met that did not know Jesus and would not have encountered him were it not for, you know, the nuns,
Right.
you know, and the orphanage, and you know, everything. Do you think that people are held back from being from discipling because they don't feel like they can do it very good? Like they don't know the Bible
Oh,
good
yeah.
enough.
Sure.
I didn't go to preaching school.
Sure.
You know, so who am I to talk about this sort of thing?
Yep.
I think it holds people back. And I think sometimes if people hear you talking, you know, about, you know, passionately about the Bible, and they find out, you know, that you aren't an ordained pastor or this other, sometimes they might look at you a little bit and say, I don't know about you guys. You know, everybody's not meant to preach or whatever.
You
but,
holy roller.
you know, but the truth is, we're all called to be disciples.
Exactly.
And you know, discipling is not much different than preaching.
It's not.
You know what I'm saying? And so to be able to have the confidence in the Holy Spirit, you know, I mean, you think about like even Moses. You know, he had a stutter, and his brother had. I mean, you know, but you know, heck, he did what he did, and Peter was a hothead, right? And he'd blow off hot, but he still was able to even with that reputation, you know, he was able to turn people's lives to Christ, you know. So I think sometimes we hold ourselves back because
Yeah.
we just say, well, who am I?
Yeah.
But sometimes we might use it as an excuse too, right? So, you know,
Yeah.
no, that's not
Yeah,
not me.
It's easy
But
to
we should-
feel unqualified.
Yeah.
It is.
Right.
And we are, all of us are unqualified, really.
Yeah, but with Jesus, you're absolutely
100%
qualified.
qualified,
And what
yeah.
is a preacher rather than somebody who's just telling somebody about the Lord?
all it is.
Right. I
That's
mean,
all it is. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, you guys touched on a lot of things. The things I was going to say, the effectiveness of the church then versus now, truth, right? In love, there was love there, right? So, he said, you know, we got to love our neighbors as ourselves, right? So, and he even said, God even said, you know, if you don't love, you don't have no part of me, right? Because God's love, right? So, if we don't love, then there's no way we can be effective, right? And I think sometimes our churches have become pretty callous, and to the point of hatred sometimes, you know, just out and out mean, you
Can
know,
feel
about
that
certain
way.
things, not just to people outside the church, people inside the church
Yeah.
to each other, right? And so I think, you know, I think it was the Righteous Brothers had it right. We've lost that love and feeling, right? I think we got to get it back, you know. And so I think the love of the church is the nucleus of the church, and the nucleus is Christ, because Christ is love, right? So love is the nucleus of the church, right? I think it must start there. And those fellas and ladies back in the first church, man, there was a great love there. They had to have great love to sacrifice their life. These guys, you know, they just seen him crucify Jesus. You know, so I mean, they were coming after these guys, and all of them died horrible deaths, with the exception of John. But he was persecuted tremendously, with his eyes poked out, put on Isle of Patmos, and you know, well, that's biblical. And then historians say he was also dipped in hot boiling oil. You know, I don't know if he was; it wasn't biblical, but I'm sure it happened. You know, if it was in our history books. But the thing is these guys were, I mean, they were punished because they told people about Jesus, but it was because they loved him, right? And I think the other thing that Tim just said, you know, is that discipling, right? And maybe our lack of, you know, you got to love and you got to preach the truth, you know, and be willing to do so, even though you don't think a new convert, somebody that just had been saved a month ago, is just as qualified as somebody that's been saved for 50 years. It's just your story. You said it earlier. You may not know Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John backwards and forwards, but you know the Jesus that saved you.
Yeah.
Right? And man, if you can just tell somebody what Jesus did for you, that's just as effective as a preacher standing up here and quoting all these scriptures on a Sunday morning. It's probably more effective because it is your story, right? And so those fellas told their story. Could you imagine blind Bartimaeus talking to somebody about what Jesus did for him? You think they wouldn't listen to him?
Yeah.
You know, these and those people knew him. They knew he stood out there on that corner begging for money all the time, and they saw him blind. You know, now all of a sudden this dude's looking at him and can tell him what time it is. You know, and he said, "Listen, I got to go eat lunch, but let me tell you one more time,
Yeah.
Jesus done this, right?" You know, and then he walked. It
And the
goes back to
people
what you
with him.
said, right? You give your testimony. How are you going to deny that? You can, but it's going to be awful hard to do it. You know, so I think they loved and they were willing to tell that story, right? Their own story, and I think that goes a long way to love, to tell their story, and then be willing to disciple those three things, and I don't know, there's others. I'm sure you guys got some more too. There's so much that we could do as churches, and we've done a great job of trying to catch the fish, right? I think we've done a good job as far as the outward things, but when we get them, what do we do with them, right? I think that's where we miss it as churches. I think that's where I would say we're not as healthy as we were. We teach people how to fish, but we don't teach them how to cook the fish, right? We don't teach them the next step. So we teach people, right, hey, go out there and compel them to come. And Jesus gave us that commission to go compel them to come. Go in the highways and hedges, compel them, right? So we've done a good job of that. I think churches, I would tell you, I think the modern church has done a much better job than churches in the past at getting people to church, drawing people to church. We've figured out what draws people, and we've done those things. But I think where the earlier church did a much better job was they knew how to do those things we just talked about. When they got them there, they knew what to do with them. And I don't know that we know that because maybe we're not discipling as good as we should, maybe, to what we talked about earlier on.
Well,
maybe our people aren't as equipped.
It's a personal commitment. And, if you happen to be the one standing next to somebody, or you bring them to Christ, or they come to you and they're asking for prayer and that sort of thing, it's not a real quick prayer. I shouldn't be. Real quick prayer, okay, bye, see you later, good luck. Right. I mean, at that point, you should feel invested in that person, and it's not an easy thing to do, because I mean, it's just not an easy thing to do. I mean, you got somebody else that you're vested in or invested in, and that sort of thing, and folks just have a hard time with it. Goes back to, I told y'all before, that Mary Knox sermon called "Dirty Faith," and it was just a visual thing. But she said, we got to be willing to roll up our sleeves and invest ourselves in people and get dirty. What people would think, I don't want to get in that. I don't want to get involved in that, right? But we have to be, willing to do that.
It's a great point.
Willing to answer the phone.
Yeah.
On a phone call, you may not want to answer.
Yeah.
Right. Just
Right.
like there
Be present.
plenty of ways to be. Yeah, absolutely.
That's something I want to work on more and more. Just be present for people. I think if you're present, you can help so much. If you ain't present, to your point, I may not be there, but it's what I didn't contribute.
Yeah, something else too. So we're sitting here as fairly mature men, I guess, and more advanced in years. But sometimes I used to be really skeptical about young people who had given their life to Christ, and they were all on fire, and it's like, you don't know nothing yet, right, about life and whatnot, And, it's like, and I'm sure some of them down the road probably fall away and that kind of stuff. But then I think sometimes to myself, I wish I would have started living for God when I was that young.
Yeah,
because if you don't, then you have to overcome the life you've built to try to get back to the life Christ intended
Great
for you.
point, Tim.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And it's hard. So, like, even me today, I'm telling you, man, work, save, try to get to a certain point in life, retirement, that kind of stuff, and I'm fairly involved, and I do a lot of things, but I could do more things if I wasn't so concerned about secular needs, I guess. But if I had at a very young age been wise enough to accept Christ in that way and fully trust Him and let Him guide every step of my life, I wouldn't have this. I wouldn't be trying to now overcome, this whole life I built. I don't know if I'm confusing you or not.
No,
I think a lot of people that way. And so I was given, again, about tithing. I was talking to my nephew on vacation last week, and he's killing it. He's a young man, got a great job. He's saving for it. Ever since he was able, saving in his retirement, he's doing it all. He's doing the Roth, the 401k,
Right.
company match. He's doing it all, man. I'm talking, man, Tyler, you're doing really good. I said, every question I ask you, you got the right answer for it. And then it dawned on me. I said, there's one thing you're not doing, Ty. And he's like, what? And I said, tithing. And he said, he's kind of chuckled. He said, I can't afford to tithe. I'm giving all my money all those other places. And I said, you can't afford not to. But like even me, and you know where I'm at on some of this stuff, and either you can control your money or your money's going to control you.
That's right.
And I'm just like, control your money sort of thing and be smart about it. So I'm trying to get to where I can help people with that so that biblically, they will put that first.
Yes.
But this whole time, I've been talking to him and other young people. I'm trying to say, you need to start investing here, investing there. I'll show you how to do it. And sometimes I even forget to say, well, first, are you tithing? Well, are you going to church? Are you tithing? Because first things first. And I promise you, If you will do those things, and everything else will be okay.
That's so good,
If
yeah.
you'll be obedient to God in every way, and tithing is one of them. But it's a very hard thing. There's a time in my life when I didn't. I mean, I'm telling you.
Oh, me
you know?
too. Yeah.
And I didn't. But anyway, so even me personally, right? So I try to get over this hump, this life I built for myself, and I tell myself, well, if I can ever get to retirement, then I can commit myself full time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, like, again, not to shine any light on you, but like
Yeah.
what you have done,
Yeah.
these recent weeks,
Yeah.
to be able to say, all right, God, I trust you,
Right.
and walk away, from a full-time career, which you have always had,
Right.
and to be able to just say, I'm putting it in your hands. I'm dependent on you, and I trust you. That's a big move, man. And I mean, look,
I'll put more pressure on me.
it didn't take you. Well, it's no pressure. I mean, it's, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I 100% agree.
It's obvious to everybody
Yes.
that God's hand is on Gethsemane,
Yeah.
and I'm just like surprised it took you so long.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you finally took that move, because it is an example of what we're talking about.
Right.
So not that you weren't all in. You were, but you could only go so far
Right.
because you had other obligations.
Right.
Well, now, you're still all in, but different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
this is it. I mean, you got
all-
this in your family,
That's it.
and so it's a huge move, and it's really what. How do we improve the church? How do we make better disciples?
Being willing to do it. Yeah. Such a good point. And since you brought it up, I mean, I agree. I'm going to use that real quick, and I know we're running out of time. I want to wrap, but
Yeah.
it's a great point because, when I was working, since we brought that up, when I was working, I knew I always had that to fall back on too. So if for some reason it didn't work here, which I knew it would because God called us to do it, but if it didn't, you always had that to hold. So it goes back to what you said earlier. I was committed, but was I 100% committed?
Yeah.
I was not. I was 100% in my mind, but I held on to that because I thought, you know what?
Right.
If they don't like me tomorrow and they kick me out, I still got somewhere to go. Or if something happens, but I always had that. Now, it's me and Jesus, and and Lord, please, And so what it does is it's what Pastor Keith preached Sunday. You got to get out of the boat at
Yeah.
some point, and you got to trust Him. And it goes. I said all that to say what we just said. I think that was the other thing that the early church had was, and I think we said it earlier. They had that commitment, so they had that love. They had that truth in them. They had to preach the truth, love people, love God, and be committed, right? And to say, look, if God says, hey Nate, I want you to sell everything you got, and I want you to go be, run an orphanage in Zimbabwe somewhere. Are you willing to do it? That's the thing that. It's easy to say I am on a Sunday morning when somebody asks that question, but if tomorrow morning he said it, right? And so you're right. I think it's held us back. It's held us back because God, I got to believe that, and you get a church the size of some of our churches in our area, I don't think God's quit calling men and women to do things.
Yeah.
But I think men and women aren't answering the call
Yep.
anymore, and it's hurting the church.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is easier for me to say, but even if something did go wrong with this move you made,
Yeah.
it's not wrong.
Oh no,
It's
no.
part of the
Yeah.
plan. It's
is.
going to be okay.
Yeah,
Right. I mean,
right.
it's going to be okay, even if it doesn't go like according to what we have in our minds.
I'm sure it's not gonna go the way I thought
And
it
have it, but
Yeah.
but having that trust and
Yeah.
faith, right, to say,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to do this, and
Yeah.
and no matter what happens,
Yeah.
it's going to be just fine.
Takes me to Job. Good way to stop,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it takes us to Job, right? Though he slay me, yet will I serve him. Well, yet
Yeah.
will I trust him, right? No matter what happens, to Tim's point, that's a great way to end it because I think that is something that is an attribute of the early church that we desperately need today is to have. There are people doing that, but as a whole, that's what we need. No matter what, Lord, I'm here. And Abraham comes to mind. And Abraham was willing to go to a country he didn't even know where he was going. God said, pack up everything and go, right? He just started going. Had no GPS coordinates, nothing, and he just went. And I think that's, and if you see in the Bible, men and women that made that type of an impact, Paul and Noah and Moses and some of these people, man, they made a tremendous impact for God, but they had to walk away from, like you said, they had to trust.
Yep.
That's hard to do, man. And that's trust in your tithing, trust in your commitment as a person, trust in your love of God, trust in your love of your neighbor. Man, that commitment, and maybe that's the bottom line. You know, the early church versus today. You know, maybe
Nice.
that's it. Is the commitment level across the board?
That's good.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
All right, that was good.
man,
Yeah,
enjoyed
that's
it, guys.
great.
That was a great,
Yeah,
great
time flew
podcast.
by.
We got so much we could talk about left. I know we could be here another hour or two, but
Yeah.
just appreciate you guys being here. I really do.
Yeah.
I want to tell you that from the bottom of my heart. It's something I look forward to Mondays
Yeah, it's
with you
fun.
guys. I know it's taxing on your time and your
No.
families, but
That's
man, I enjoy it so much. Thank you for being your commitment to being here too, and it
Yeah.
helps a lot of people. I know it does people in our church, and we see some things coming back from people outside. So thank you for doing it, and
fantastic.
look forward to it. So, Brother Nate, you
Well,
want to close?
yeah. Well, real quick, you know, and as ineffective or effective as we want to be, I think that the local church is still the single
Absolutely.
greatest place
Yeah.
that you
Amen.
can go to. You
Yeah,
know, we just want
yeah.
to put that out there.
Right.
And also, you know, we absolutely love getting to do this with you as well, Mark.
Yeah,
It's,
man,
it's,
it's awesome.
it's fantastic. We love being here, and
Mm-hmm.
and if you're watching or listening and you liked it as well, please like and subscribe and share and put it out there. We'd love
Yeah.
to get it out to more people.
Right.
Not for us, but just so we can get Jesus in front of more people.
Amen.
And that's the goal here, right? So
That's right.
Well, we love y'all, and I love you guys.
Until
All right.
next
Love you,
time,
bye.
stay in the weeds.